For a series that's been absent for over a decade, bringing back an IP can be a breath of fresh air compared to your modern counterparts. However, this can lead to alienating those who are unfamiliar with the franchise and can lead to developers making changes for the sake of keeping up with current trends, while sacrificing what made their predecessors memorable. Microids have made their return with the third entry in the Syberia series, and while it retains the aesthetics of SoCal's previous games, it is heavily brought down by lacklustre graphics, a non-logical plot, and unpolished game mechanics. Syberia 3 takes place some time after the events of Syberia 2, with playable character, Kate Walker, found unconscious in sub-zero temperatures. Fortunately, the Ukols, a diminutive race introduced in the previous game, uncover her body and take her to a hospital, and after regaining her bearings, she wishes to help them reach their sacred migration. Kate is also being pursued not only by an agent from the US after going rogue from her previous life as a lawyer, but also a female doctor named Olga and a general with his group of soldiers. The first thing I was greeted with is how Syberia 3 does not represent a current gen game. Although the character models, including Kate, were serviceable, the outdated environments, choppy frame rate and the atrocious facial animations were such an eyesore. You think the animations in Mass Effect Andromeda were dreadful, they were nothing compared to those in Syberia 3. The voice acting is terrible, as the characters' voices don't match up with the people they're trying to portray, which makes no sense since the game is set somewhere in Eastern Europe and yet all of their inhabitants somehow have American accents. Furthermore, it's hilarious to see Kate trying to impersonate Olga's Russian dialect to create a distraction, even though the person who voiced her isn't Russian. There was one character I encountered who was in his 60s, but the actor who was portraying him sounded like he was in his 20s. It's not just the cast where the voice acting falters, their delivery sounds wooden and have little to no pace or punctuation. It's understandable voice acting is something which can't be taken lightly, as you're providing your talent to enforce your character's personality. However, having appalling performances can be detrimental to your story and the characters, and in the case of Syberia 3, the performances are so bad there were some outtakes still left in. And of course, we have the main antagonists, who are as bland and generic as they can get. Their motivation is to make the Ukols depart from their tribal culture and conform to modern society, but they're not menacing because we don't get to find out why these villains have this hatred, and on top of that they are also not intelligent to be seen as a threat. When Kate and Kurt make their escape from the hospital, the enemies do a pitiful job intercepting them despite being equipped with AKs. There's two problems with their logic. If the antagonists are so determined to stop the Ukols via diplomacy, then why would they send armed men to intercept them? And even if the bad guys are willing to use lethal force, then why would they hold Kurt captive by hypnotizing him? This makes their intervention in the climax feel contrived, and it's clear the game is setting itself up for a sequel, which may not even happen due to the other point I'm about to illustrate. Syberia 3 also lacks a sense of unity between Kate and the party she accompanies. For the most part, she's tasked to do all the heavy lifting while the Ukols meander around. As such, I wish the game had puzzles where both parties had to work together in order to solve a problem, but instead they mostly rely on her to resolve their problems. It's no wonder why every single one of them are overweight. Speaking of puzzles, the difficulty is inconsistent. On one hand they can be child's play, but on the other some of them are so hard it makes finding each solution feel like it's based on luck than skill. This is because the game sometimes misguides you on what you need to do or where you need to go. For example, in the first level Kirk wanted to ascertain a key that I tried to use, so my instinct was to give it to him since it was in my possession. Instead, he was referring to the blueprint for the device, which would have been fine and all if he wasn't being too vague. Another example is when I was tasked to use the icebreaker on the crystal ship. The captain advised me to shift up to 3rd gear, only to shift back down to 2nd quickly, but the problem was I have to shift from 1st to 3rd and then shift into 2nd. This rubbed me the wrong way because I'm sure you don't skip gears when using manual transmission, and to me that is bad game design. Each level you'll explore has NPCs to talk to and items for solving puzzles, but this is hampered by the fact you won't be able to interact with these elements once you reach certain points, so if you find a specific item within the environment but can't be utilised, it's more than likely for a future event. This unfortunately promotes backtracking because not only inhibits exploration but also pads out the game. It might have been Microids' way of keeping the player on course, but as far as I'm concerned it makes me question, why would they encourage exploration if the level design caters to a linear structure? That's like making a game open world, only to restrict players to specific parts of the map and what missions they could accomplish. That's not to say players should be left to their own devices, as it won't give any sense of progression, but it feels like it was mishandled in Syberia 3. Also, Kate's movement is sluggish because of how unresponsive the controls are. I wasn't expecting the protagonist to perform acrobatic moves as it would be out of place for this kind of game, but the input delay was incredibly frustrating, meaning there were times where I ended up traversing stairs unintended, or even interacting with puzzles that required precise movement. To add insult to injury, the semi-fixed camera restricts what you see, which is also aggravating as some items are hidden in such awkward places. Syberia 3 introduces a telltale system where players can determine how Kate reacts to NPCs, in addition with dialogue options to persuade them, but this aspect for the most part is worthless as it doesn't have any significance to the characters and plot, and on top of that the subtitles don't match up with what's being said on screen. Of course, it wasn't necessary for me since I'm not deaf, but the fact this issue wasn't addressed is jarring. With all of that being said, by the time I reached the halfway point, I was more concerned of finishing my playthrough due to how frustrating and monotonous it became, rather than soaking in everything the game had to offer. To the game's credit, the soundtrack composed by Inanzur, who also did the music for Syberia 2, is superbly crafted, and Benoit Sakal's steampunk aesthetics still remain as you travel from different locations from a hospital, a harbour, an abandoned theme park, etc. In the end though, Syberia 3 is a game that left a bad taste in my mouth. Developer Microids could have done a far better job of producing a game that would have been an improvement over its predecessors, but due to its cumbersome controls, lacklustre story, dated graphics and dodgy game design severely hampered the experience. It also suffers from a lack of innovation, and the changes it does make are executed so poorly. I was looking forward to Kate's next adventure, but it ended up being an underwhelming, frustrating bore.